Okay, this is part 2 of chapter 11. The door of the rectangular little old house opened. Me and Joey had never seen Grandma Sands in our lives. Byron said he could remember that she was the meanest, ugliest person in the world, but he was probably lying. He was only 4 the last time Mama and Dad were here. Byron said he'd had nightmares for a couple of weeks after they left Alabama 10 years ago. All the weird Watsons had real good imaginations, but none of us were ready for what was to come out of the door of that house. I was expecting a troll. I thought Grandma Sands would be bigger than Dad. I thought she'd be foaming at the mouth like she had rabies. I remember a couple of years ago how Mama had cried and cried when someone from Alabama and called from Alabama and told us that Grandma Sands had had a little stroke, so I knew that she walked with a cane now. I'd imagine the cane would be as big as a tree trunk with crows and owls and lizards living in it. What came out was a teeny weeny old woman that looked just like Mama would if someone shrank her down about 5 sizes and sucked all the juice out of her. Grandma Sands waved a little skinny stick in the air and said, "What are you all doing here today? You ain't supposed to be here till Monday. Man, if you think Mama can talk in a southern style, you should hear Grandma Sands." Mama was blubbering and smiling and covering her mouth with both hands and ran right up on the porch and nearly broke the little old woman in half. "How are you doing, Mama?" she cried on the woman's shoulders, then held Grandma Sands out to look at her. "You look so good." Boy, Mama can lie when she wants to. "Y'all come on over here and give your granny a hug." Me and Joey and Byron shuffled over in a little crowd, and when we got through pushing each other forward, I was at the front and had to go on the porch to hug Grandma Sands first. I tried to be real careful with her. She was just a little taller than me and skinnier than anything I'd ever seen alive. I could see her brown scalp right through her curly silver hair. Grandma Sands squeezed hard and cried all over me. She wiped a bunch of tears away with a twisted up hand and blinked a couple of times before she looked at me. She was so short, and she didn't even have to look down. She tried to say something, but she couldn't talk. She just stuck her bottom lip out some and nodded her head up and down a couple of times, then pulled me back to her and squeezed me like crazy. Mama slapped the back of my head and said, "Kenneth Bernard Watson, you best quit acting so silly and give your grandmother a hug." I squeezed her a little. A smell like baby powder came out of her when I did. I really think I could feel her lungs when I touched her back. I don't know what got Joey started, but she was off to the races with her tears. She was the only one who'd practiced what she'd say to Grandma Sands. She sniffed a couple of times and said, "Hi, Grandma Sands. It's a real pleasure to meet you." You could only half understand what she was saying, though. Grandma Sands matched Joey tear for tear. They squeezed each other for a while. Then Grandma Sands got her little squeaky voice back and said to Mama, "Lord, Lona, if this child ain't you. Look at this baby, just as pretty and sweet as you." Mama and Joey grinned like 2 nuts. Byron was next. This is what I dreamed about. These were the 2 meanest, most evil people I'd ever known, and I knew only one of them was going to come out of this alive. There was going to be a battle, something like if Godzilla met King Kong, or if Frankenstein met Dracula, or like when champion wrestler Bobo Brazil meets the Sheik. I'd imagine that a week or 2 after we got back to Flint, we'd get a phone call from Alabama with the winner of the big battle at the other end. If it was Byron, he'd talk kind of cool and low out of the corner of his mouth and say, "Shoot, man, you better come get this old chick. I ate her alive." If Grandma Sands won the battle, we'd have to hold the phone away from our ear while she shouted, "Lona, you call this a bad child? This little saint is ready to come back north and go to Sunday school and scrub all y'all's floors." But as soon as I saw Grandma Sands, I knew that Byron would destroy this poor old woman. I was even afraid Mama might decide not to leave him in Alabama. Byron walked up to the porch real cool and kind of bent over to give Grandma Sands a hug. Grandma Sands squeezed him hard. "Lona, will you teach these babies up north? Don't they know how to give no one a proper hug?" She held Byron by the arms and looked at him from top to bottom. "You grew up to be a fine-looking boy. You was so puny when you were born, you nearly worried us crazy. Got strong, too." She slapped Byron's arm, and he kind of laughed. Grandma Sands reached up and ran her wrinkly old hand over Byron's head. "A little short on hair, but we gonna get on just fine. What you think, By?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, good. See, there's lots of things you could do down here. Mr. Robert ain't as much help as he used to be, so all them things he used to do, you can do now. Mama said, who? Mr. Who? Dad came up on the porch and got a ton of hugs and tears too. Then Grandma Sands pulled everybody together. Her little arms could only get around one person at a time, but all the weird Watsons stood there with some of us laughing, some of us crying, and some of us looking cool. It felt like we were all wrapped in a big ball. Grandma Sands kept saying, my family, my beautiful, beautiful family. Finally, the crowd started breaking up and Grandma Sands said, now what am I going to feed y'all? I wasn't expecting you till Monday. Me and Mr. Robert usually just have leftovers on Sunday. But I guess if Bi'll go down to Joby's and pick up some things, we could have chicken tonight. You good at following directions, Byron? Huh? Bi's face twisted up. What? Grandma Sands' voice popped up. Bi looked surprised and said, I meant, ma'am. You good at following directions? Joby's is a good little walk. I said he can follow directions real good, Grandma Sands. He's not as dumb as he looks. I shut up real quick and wished I hadn't said anything when Grandma Sands looked at me and said, Lona, maybe there's two who should be spending the summer down here with their granny. Everybody started going inside the ugly little house. Mama sounded worried. Mama, who is this Mr. Robert? Grandma Sands laughed just like the Wicked Witch of the West and said, honey, we gotta talk. You just be patient. As soon as he gets up, I want all y'all to meet him. Soon he gets up? Aw, Mama. Mama sounded real upset and disappointed, but not as disappointed as me. The way Byron kept his head down and was smiling and saying yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, that it looked like he had surrendered before the first punch was thrown. Instead of King Kong and Godzilla, it was like King Kong and Bambi. Instead of Bobo Brazil and the Sheik, it was like Bobo Brazil and Captain Kangaroo. Instead of Dracula and Frankenstein, it was like Dracula and a giraffe, and Byron was all neck. He knew exactly what I was thinking. After Grandma Sands gave us directions, Byron looked at me sideways and said, what are you staring at? I just shook my head. What you expect, I asked. You seen her. That bird's as old as dirt. She's so old, I bet she used to step over dinosaur turds. I ain't gonna have her death on my hands. I knew that was a lie. It seemed like all the fight was out of Byron, and we'd only been in Birmingham for a couple of minutes. Okay, so that was chapter 11. Please, on Google Classroom, leave comments or predictions for the rest of the Watsons' trip to Birmingham.